Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be going over my top 10 favorite works of non-speculative fiction of all time. As with my science fiction and fantasy favorites lists, I first went through my non-speculative fiction favorites in 2021. But I have since then acquired new favorites and decided that, as with the other two lists, this one could use an update. A few reminders before I start. As with the two previous lists, I use the word work here and not novel because I don't just consider standalone novels for favorite status. Feeling super confident about all-time favorites becomes very difficult for me past the 3rd to 5th places, and this is all the more applicable for me when considering literature outside of SFF. Seriously though, this is by far the list most likely to undergo significant change as time goes by. Additionally, in this instance, I use the category name non-speculative literature because I'm not just considering general fiction stricto sensu, but also genres like, well, historical fiction. Finally, nothing on this list will have a rating below a 7.5 out of 10, and I will be sure to let you know if I have a dedicated book review available on my channel for a particular work. My number 10 is, without a doubt, the weakest entry on the list. It's also historical fiction, not general fiction, and it is Bernard Cornwell's The Warlord Chronicles trilogy. And no, I do not have physical copies of this trilogy with me at this time. I lent them out a while ago and never got them back. Welp. This is definitely a series of books I need to reread one day, and this is going to be a running theme here as an FYI, but it has stood out in my mind for years now, and I remember thoroughly enjoying it when I first read it. I consider it my second favorite literary interpretation of the Arthurian mythos. That's what it is, a retelling of that. Though this one is told through a historical fiction lens, not a fantasy fiction one. There's not much more I can say about this trilogy at this juncture, unfortunately, but just like in 2021, I figured it was just good enough to make it onto the list. Besides, I didn't really have anything else to put in number 10. My number 9 is a rather tentative, I'll admit, and last-minute newcomer to the list, and it is Renee Denfeld's The Enchanted, a short novel that takes place in and around a male prison and centers on a female investigator whose job it is to get her clients off of death row and back into life imprisonment. This is a very dark and difficult story in places, as it deals with the horrific pain and abuse human beings inflict on one another, and the cycle of violence. The theming deals with all of this, but also the death penalty, the carriage or miscarriage of justice, yet there is also a lot of beauty in these pages. This is a quietly powerful and quietly hard-hitting story that often had me tearing up, and when general fiction hits me like this, I kind of have to acknowledge it as a soft, in this case, new favorite. My number 8 is Kate Elizabeth Russell's My Dark Vanessa, a novel I have read twice now and with which I have a complicated relationship, as it, along with Putney, which I'll get to in a few minutes, is the closest I've ever come to reading a fictional account, as it were, of a very specific and painful part of my own lived experience. I have videos about that if you want additional context. My Dark Vanessa is what I like to call a Lolita responsive or pedo-hebephilic grooming narrative, and whilst I find it somewhat lacking with regards to prose or deeper character work, it is also a novel I feel very grateful towards, as reading it kickstarted the re-examination of my own experience of child grooming and sexual abuse. The theming centered on that specific topic and the related issues with repressed trauma, what I'll call self-gaslighting, and consent is superb, and I will always give it due marks for that alone. My number 7 is Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, a general fiction favorite, yes, but also my current favorite classic of English literature. This is a romantic, with a capital R, novel I reread this year, last month in fact, and that I thoroughly enjoyed upon said reread. It features a female character the titular Jane Eyre, whom I believe can be read as autistic or more broadly neurodivergent, and whom I related to a fair bit. Well, partly yes, because of that. There is also, for the record, a secondary character who can be read as neurodivergent, with ADHD more specifically. There is solid proto-feminist theming and psychological exploration, and yes, I'll admit, this time round, I definitely dug the love story at the heart of it all too. My number 6 is Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, a novel I read too long ago now, quite frankly, but that I nonetheless chose to keep on this list. Also, my copy has a little memento from my beloved little Lily. I've forgotten a fair bit of The Bell Jar when it comes to details, not gonna lie here, but I do remember finding it highly resonating given it deals with the main characters and, kind of by projection, the author's experience of debilitating suicidal depression, which she describes as feeling trapped inside of a, well, bell jar. I found it very meaningful at the time, hence the high rating, but I need to feel more confident about this selection in the future, which is why I will be rereading it next year. My number 5 is Alice Walker's The Color Purple, a novel I first read, again, a bit too long ago, honestly, which is why I will also reread it next year. Still, The Color Purple remains on this list because I remember loving it and finding it specifically very moving. It is, at times, a very dark tale that follows the life journeys of two separated Black sisters born in the southern United States during the, regrettable to say the least, Jim Crow laws era. There is a lot of abuse and pain in the story. Content warnings certainly apply. Also a lot of light and delicate theming on love, sisterhood, and one's relationship to God. There is, additionally, solid bisexual representation here. But like I said, I need to reread this one so I can feel more confident about it and its high rating. My number 4 is Sofka Zinoviev's Putney, a novel which, just like My Dark Vanessa, I have read twice. And just like My Dark Vanessa, it is also a Lolita-responsive narrative. Though Putney, for its part, features both the point of view of the victim of pedo-hebephilic grooming and sexual abuse, please forgive me for doing this, and that of her predator. It additionally features the point of view of the victim's childhood best friend, and it, yes, does matter to the overall story. This specific narrative choice, as far as I'm concerned, gave the story greater psychological and thematic depth than that which I found in My Dark Vanessa. But again, this is not me actually dissing on My Dark Vanessa either, right? It's still on the list. Still, I thus found Putney even more poignant and personally relevant. Additionally, whilst My Dark Vanessa initiated the process of my coming to terms with my own experience of abuse, Putney allowed me to complete it, more or less. It's still kind of a work in progress, if I'm being perfectly honest. And well, you know, it is a necessary but bloody painful process, let me tell you. My number 3 is a book I first read last year, and thus another newcomer to the list, and it is Gail Honeyman's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. The story follows the titular, Eleanor Oliphant, on a dark, emotional, but ultimately hopeful journey, and features superb CPTSD and, as far as I'm concerned, autistic-coded representation in the very character of Eleanor that I could strongly relate to. There is a lot said here about the experience of being different, about trauma, isolation, and depression, and whilst yes, it could be said to be somewhat naively optimistic in certain respects, sometimes that's just what your own injured soul needs. Know what I mean? My number 2 is yet again a newcomer to the list, one I'm still mildly surprised by actually, and it is Sally Rooney's Normal People. This bitch, as I affectionately call it, is a love story involving two young adults who aren't, in fact, entirely normal. Marianne, the female protagonist, especially. And fuck me if this didn't wreck my heart hard. Because I'm apparently a hypersensitive and romantic, still with a capital R, thank you very much, dumbass who projected some of her own relational experiences onto it way more than is healthy, really. I related intensely to aforementioned Marianne, as I read her both as an intellectually gifted and an autistic woman like me. And you know what? Sue me. I still confidently stand by that. Who knows if I'll feel the same when I reread this someday. But for now, this bitch simply has to be my number 2. And that's that. Finally, as with the science fiction and fantasy lists, my number 1 non-speculative fiction favorite of all time has still not been dethroned, and thus, to the surprise of, well, none of my regulars at least, remains Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. This novel tells the story of adult, unreliable narrator par excellence, Humbert's obsession with and abuse, though he would call it love, of Dolores Hayes, a child of 12. The book very much does not do the apology of pedophilia. This is a hill I will happily die on until I myself die. But it does offer a brilliant, psychologically astute, and in-depth character study of a child molester. Though, as a quick aside, as a victim of childhood sexual abuse myself, I found the portrayal of this child molester very useful for the analysis of my own lived experience. So, thank you, Lolita. However, this novel is about so much more. It is about memory, the way we interpret our life and actions, about the sublimation of horror and pain and suffering through art, and the playful beauty of language. Oh yes, Lolita has some of the greatest prose I've ever encountered, and has hit me deeply in different ways all 3 times I have read it. So obviously, yes, this is still my number 1. So there you have all of my current non-speculative fiction favorites of all time. I hope you found this video interesting and engaging. If you want to exchange about any of the books I mentioned on my list, please feel free to do so. And on that note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all reasonably soon once again in a couple of other videos. But until then, bye-bye.